For 25 years, Vladimir Putin ran Russia like a mafia boss. You stay quiet, you get protection. You follow orders, you get paid. That was the deal. Loyalty for stability, silence for a share of the spoils, obedience for the promise that life wouldn't suddenly fall apart. It wasn't democracy, it wasn't free speech, but for a lot of people it was enough. Enough to keep the lights on, the paycheck coming, and the future predictable. But in May 2026, every level of that deal started collapsing at the same time. And when a mafia state starts eating itself, the rest of the world feels it. Because this isn't just about who sits in the Kremlin. It's about what happens to a nuclear power when the people inside it stop believing the boss can protect them. The first crack was public. Night of May 4th, 2026. A Ukrainian drone hits Mosfilm Tower, 7 kilometers from the Kremlin. That building doesn't house actors or producers. It houses senior SVR officials, Russia's foreign intelligence officers who run operations abroad. If a drone can get that close, with S-400 systems and air defenses layered around Moscow, then the question writes itself. If it can reach Mosfilm, can it reach the Kremlin? And if it can, why hasn't it already? The answer tells you how scared the system really is. 2 days later, snipers appeared on the tower's roof for the first time in 20 years. They weren't guarding against drones coming from Kyiv. They were guarding against people inside Moscow. And that tells you everything about where the real threat is coming from. According to a leaked EU intelligence report picked up by CNN and the Financial Times, Putin's biggest fear right now isn't NATO tanks on the border. It's betrayal from his own political elite. And one name keeps coming up in those briefings: Sergei Shoigu. For years, Shoigu was Putin's fishing buddy. The guy he'd go hiking with in Siberia, the face of the Russian military on TV, the minister who sold the war as quick and decisive. Now that friendship is a security risk. Not because Shoigu has his own army, but because he still has a network. People inside the military who answer his calls first, who remember who promoted them, who know where the real levers of power are. In a system built on personal loyalty, a network you don't control is a threat. So Putin starts dismantling it. March 2026, Shoigu's former deputy Ruslan Salakov gets arrested for corruption. On the surface, it looks routine. But inside the Kremlin, there's an unwritten rule older than any law on the books. People in the inner circle don't go to prison. Breaking that rule is like sending a text message that says, "You're next." And when the message gets sent to Shoigu, everyone else in the circle starts checking their phones. The paranoia didn't stop there. December 22, 2025, Lieutenant General Fanil Seva is killed by a car bomb in the parking lot of his own building in Moscow. That zone is supposed to be protected by the FSB. If a general can be killed in the heart of the capital, then nowhere is safe. Not even for the people who run security. 3 days later, the top brass meet behind closed doors. And instead of figuring out who did it, they start blaming each other. Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov goes after FSB Chief Alexander Bortnikov. Bortnikov fires back that he didn't have the resources. Picture two mafia capos arguing in front of the boss while the cops are still outside. That's how fragile it looks when the people who are supposed to protect the system start fighting for their own survival. And it's not just the generals. November 2025, the FSB announced they foiled an assassination attempt against Shoigu at Troyekurovskoye Cemetery. The problem is, the only people who knew he was visiting his mother's grave that day were inside. Either someone opened the gate or the whole story was made up to cover something else. In both cases, the conclusion is the same. The security perimeter doesn't protect anymore. The perimeter itself has become the threat. Putin's response has been to disappear. He hasn't visited a single military facility in 2026. His family left their residences months ago. State TV now broadcasts pre-recorded footage, carefully edited, carefully timed. Independent journalists documented 3 identical offices built in Novo-Ogaryovo, Sochi, and Valdai. Same panels, same door handles, same carpets. Even his guards don't always know where he slept that night. Sociologists who study authoritarian collapse say it looks like Saddam Hussein in his final months. The leader stops moving, stops being seen, and the state keeps running on recordings. He's been living for weeks in bunkers outside Krasnodar, and the message it sends to everyone around him is simple. The man who built his image on being in control is now afraid of his own shadow. What makes this moment different is who started talking. In the past, criticism came from liberal opposition figures who were easy to label as foreign agents and shut down. This time, the criticism is coming from inside the system itself. April 22, 2026, Gennady Zyuganov stood at the Duma podium and spoke directly to Putin. Zyuganov is the leader of the Communist Party, the party that made the 1917 revolution. And he said, "We told you 10 times the economy is bound to collapse. The first quarter was a disaster. If you don't act now, we'll get 1917 again. Let that sink in." The Communist Party leader warning against a communist revolution. That only happens when the people who benefit most from the system realize the system is about to drop them. 2 months earlier, a deputy from Samara, Grigory Yerv, tried to say the same thing. He told Parliament that they had to share responsibility with Putin for the failure of military operations. His microphone was cut in 3 seconds, but the sentence was already recorded. The fuse for this kind of courage was lit back in autumn 2022 at a small municipal council in St. Petersburg. They sent an official petition to the State Duma demanding Putin's removal for treason. 4 arguments. He destroyed the army, created a demographic catastrophe, collapsed the economy, and led the country into strategic defeat. They were punished for it, but the message stayed. 4 years later, the discontent behind that message has multiplied. Meanwhile, the propaganda machine that held everything together is losing its voice. Vladimir Soloviev, the Kremlin's loudest TV host, went on air and called anyone complaining about internet outages a revolutionary. He was trying to scare people into silence, but he ended up exposing the Kremlin's deepest fear. When a regime has to tell its people not to start a revolution, it's already crossed the line, and people started answering back. April 30th, 2026, a video from Samara exploded online. Russian women stood in front of the camera and said Putin's name out loud, demanding his resignation. Their language was raw, their voices were shaking, but the message was clear. Go hide in your damp bunker with all your officials. In Tuapse, the oil refinery was hit 4 times in 2 weeks, and the government said nothing. Then Victoria Bonya, a former reality TV star with 13 million followers, posted an 18-minute video talking directly to Putin. "The people are afraid of you," she said. "Artists are afraid. Governors are afraid. The people are like a coiled spring. One day, it will snap." Even Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov admitted the criticisms touched on sensitive subjects. That almost never happens. Soloviev tried to crush Bonya by calling her a foreign agent. She hit back with an AI parody that got 10 million views in 24 hours. He wanted to make her smaller. He made her bigger. Political analyst Abbas Galimov put it bluntly. Revolutions aren't started by professional revolutionaries. They're started by people like Bonya, people no one expected to speak up. And if you look at the economic elite, the story is the same. In the 4th year of the war, the Kremlin started seizing oligarch assets to cover budget deficits. Since 2022, companies and assets worth 4 trillion rubles have been transferred to state control. Moscow's largest private airport, Domodedovo, Russia's biggest pasta manufacturer, Makfa, dozens more. December 2025, the oligarchs sent a letter directly to Putin demanding the nationalization stop, an open challenge that has never happened before in his Russia. Even the people closest to him are leaving. Dmitry Kok spent 25 years at Putin's side, managing the most sensitive files from the Second Chechen War to the Sochi Olympics. He warned against the war in 2022 and was proven right. In 2025, he submitted a comprehensive reform plan: peace negotiations, independent judiciary, economic reform. Putin rejected it. Kok walked out, leaked the plan to the press, and closed the door. Oligarch Oleg Deripaska, who has always been loyal, said publicly that next year cannot be survived on inertia alone. A report from the Carnegie Center says the consensus mechanism inside the Kremlin has completely collapsed. Even Igor Sechin, Gennady Timchenko, and the Rotenberg brothers don't feel safe anymore. If the elite are wobbling, look at the army. On the front lines, soldiers are saying things that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. A former tractor driver turned tanker driver spoke to a camera and said, "I'm not fighting for Putin. I'm fighting for money. We hate Putin. No patriotism, no belief, just a paycheck." Colonel General Vladimir Churkin, one of Russia's most experienced military figures, went on RBC radio and admitted it out loud. "We received a serious and brutal lesson. The intelligence that told the Kremlin 70% of Ukrainians support us was wrong." He mocked Shoigu's presentation of the retreat from Kiev as a goodwill gesture. In a country where criticizing the war can get you 15 years in prison, a top general said this on live radio, and no one came to arrest him. The pro-war bloggers who spent 3 years selling the war to the public are done pretending. They write openly now. The average lifespan of a Russian offensive is 12 days. The front is a meat grinder. Because of the current leadership's inability to adapt to the realities of war, victory is not possible. Yevgeny Gleeman, one of the most followed Z bloggers, posted a message that said, "We're ruined. 80% of my friends closed their businesses. The system collapsed. They're lying to Vladimir Vladimirovich. People stopped saying if only the Tsar knew, he would fix it. They understand the Tsar knows and doesn't care." The most striking case is Ilya Rameslo. He was a loyal pro-war lawyer, a Z patriot who defended the system in court and online. March 17, 2026, he published a manifesto called 5 Reasons I Stopped Supporting Putin. The first line read, "Putin is not a legitimate president. He should resign and be tried as a war criminal." The next day, on the anniversary of the Crimea annexation, he was admitted to St. Petersburg Psychiatric Hospital No. 3. Speak, and you pay the price. But every voice they silence pushes 10 more people to speak. All of this shows up in the numbers, even the numbers the state releases. VTZIOM, Putin's own polling agency, announced in April 2026 that his approval rating had dropped to 65.6%, the lowest since the war started. Trust declined to 71%, and it's been falling for 7 weeks straight. 24.1% of Russians say they don't trust Putin at all. If the state poll says that, the real number is worse. Putin still has the tools to suppress dissent. FSB, Rosgvardia, state media. There's enough capacity to break protests, jail organizers, and flood the airwaves with noise. There's 25 years of experience in purging rivals and shutting down movements. The probability of a full-blown uprising is still low because there's no organized opposition left. Navalny died in prison. Independent media was shut down. Civil society was crushed. The anger on the streets is scattered, leaderless, uncoordinated. The 2022 anti-war protests were suppressed in weeks. The Kremlin can do it again, but there are 2 differences this time. First, the people protesting are no longer outsiders. They are generals, Duma deputies, pro-war bloggers, and patriotic nationalists. You can't call them foreign agents without losing your own base. If you jail them, you lose the people who enforce your power. If you don't, the criticism grows like an avalanche. Second, the economy has changed. 100,000 rubles today is worth what 56,000 rubles was in 2021. Salaries have lost half their value. The labor force dropped from 7 million to 4.4 million in 4 years. Central Bank Governor Elvira Nabiullina said herself that this has never happened in Russia's modern history. Propaganda has lost credibility. People trust Telegram channels and influencers more than state TV. Mobilization in 2022 pushed hundreds of thousands to flee. Yandex data shows searches for how to leave the country doubled in 3 months, with 40,000 in March alone. Putin can suppress the discontent of ordinary Russians, but he can't sustain this war without the support of his own circle. The oligarch crisis, the Duma rebellion, the military confessions, these are signs that support is eroding. Victoria Bonya said the people are a coiled spring. Zyuganov said 1917 will repeat. A soldier said, "We hate Putin." Koch resigned after 25 years. 40,000 people searched how to leave the country in 1 month. These aren't separate complaints. They're different faces of one truth. Putin's 25-year promise of stability in exchange for obedience is dead. There is no stability, no security, no victory. Regimes don't collapse because of external attacks. They collapse when soldiers lose faith, when the people lose trust, when the elite start looking for an exit, and when the word revolution is spoken in parliament. And maybe the heaviest words came from a Stalingrad veteran. He addressed Putin directly. "We fought so that you, your children, and your grandchildren would always have clear, peaceful skies above your heads." This isn't just an emotional reproach. It's the heaviest accusation of treason that can be made by a generation with blood. So what happens next? Nobody knows exactly when the coiled spring snaps, but every week it gets pulled tighter. The red lines have been drawn, and if you're watching this from outside Russia, you need to understand why it matters. Because when a nuclear state starts coming apart from the inside, miscalculation becomes more likely. Energy markets shift. NATO has to recalculate. The war in Ukraine enters a phase where nobody is fully in control anymore. The question isn't whether Putin can survive another year. The question is whether there's anyone left who still believes the deal is worth it. And once that belief is gone, the system doesn't need an external enemy to finish it. It finishes itself.